All right, so we're recording again. Adam, do you want to read through the next section for us? Or anyone else for that matter?
Sorry, Adam, you're muted.
Perils of Zoom.
Sorry. Ah. All right, we're skipping chapter 3 because there's no sword play in it. It's all about what he hopes to achieve with the book. So you're welcome to read that if you like, but there's no value in it for this particular activity. So we'll skip straight on to number 4. Now, I apologize for my pronunciation of these names. I'm going to butcher the hell out of them. Annibale, the responder, and Scipione, the actor. Scipione challenged Annibale to a duel for reasons of honor with the sword alone. He enters the fence, putting his hand to the sword, standing in outside guard against Annibale, as can be seen in the drawing. Annibale stands before him in inside guard, holding the point of the sword at Scipione hand to prevent him from becoming an actor and coming down to strike him. Scipione, seeing Annibale placed in inside guard while being carefully placed, looks for all the ways to safely carry a colere, which is a cut motion, to his enemy. For this, he raises a little. It is in this tempo that Annibale must bind him. But if he doesn't, Scipione, finding himself having time, beats the enemy's sword first, then draws a dritto squalembrato, advancing with a great step of the right foot and holding firm the left foot, which he immediately recovers, of which he immediately recovers the step, taking him back to his former place. Annibale, in defense of the dritto drawn by his enemy, meets his attack with an adjustment of the sword, moving his left shoulder backwards a little with a half void. He then retaliates with a reverso to the right leg. This reverso is quickly countered by Scipione by turning the sword hand. Scipione then returns to the guard we have described and draws a reverso to Annibale's head. Annibale, seeing the attack coming towards his head and being an inside guard against the guard in which the opponent has placed himself, goes in the same tempo that the reverso is pulled to make a half step with his right foot towards the enemy's left hand. Then quickly brings his left foot behind his right. Then, by turning the true edge against the reverso, he also protects against the reverso. He then responds to Scipione with a dritto to his right leg, which Scipione skillfully defends by dodging with his legs, lowering his vita and moving the sword to an inside parry position. Having done this, Scipione returns to his guard, shaking his arm and sword hand backwards, lowering the point of the sword. He then throws a quick thrust to Annibale's chest, which can be parried by him in this way. Annibale, seeing the enemy point descend from high to low, then adjusts his sword, lowering the point under that of Scipione, then quickly raises his sword, bringing with it his adversaries to the outside of his vita. With this, his sword parries the point. But there is a lot of information there.
There is. All right, so normally what we do with interpretation is try and actually act out this series of play. But I think given the constraints of sort of the medium, the fact that no two of us are in the same place, but maybe we should start looking for common themes. So one thing I noticed through this is that the guard, like there was an assumption that the guards would be asymmetric. So one person is starting in the inside guard, one person is starting in the outside. And the text seemed to suggest that for the most part, being inside of your opponent's sword, having the center line. If your opponent is on the outside, if you can go to the inside and threaten their hand, is advantageous.
Interestingly, he notes further on that outside guard is mainly used for the attacker, and inside guard is mainly used for the defender. So it's interesting that you point that out.
Yeah, or sort of, assuming I'm understanding what was discussed correctly, I'm just going to demonstrate this because it'll be easier. The first motion of the attacker, is the attack with the threat to his hand, is to move his sword, or is to start his sword moving, so that he can get the beat. In which case, where the defender has to bind, the defender basically has to close it and choke this up. Because if they're beaten, then there is an opening for the attacker to come in. It's also kind of interesting that, inside guard, actually, that one raises a question about inside guard. Because he was saying before that the hand position, the hand height, is relative to what your opponent's doing. Is inside and outside guard more about the foot position? It's just that outside guard is called outside because you're typically closing the outside line, but not necessarily. And inside guard.
So he explains it in his discussion. It's named outside guard because the hand is actually outside of the vita. So it's past the shoulder. And the inside guard is within the vita, so it's called inside guard. So inside guard is always in front of the inside shoulder, and outside guard is always outside of the shoulder on the sword side. When he's talking about adjusting the height, I believe my interpretation of that is that the hilt is usually held at roughly shoulder level, and it's the blade that's held up or down on an angle.
Okay, so it's his adjustments for that blade height. Yeah, and that would also those descriptions would also go back to, inside being the defender, outside being the attacker. You want your hand outside of the line of your body if you're going to beat, because it actually gives you sort of the momentum to do beat. And that's something you see in a lot of systems, in like 1974, or for a beat to happen, the blade has to first be withdrawn, and which leaves you vulnerable to a counterattack. So his outside guard is aggressive, because the first thing you seem to always do, or the first thing you do from what he's mentioned so far, is beat, come in, and the inside guard is defensive because it's covering yourself and sort of holding a position. And although a lot of defense seems to be not just about like being able to physically stop the sword with a parry, but also being able to threaten. So like the way he was describing that interaction, the defender, I believe it was Annibale, was threatening the attacker's arm, not the attacker's hand, not just closing lines the attacker couldn't just come barreling straight in. Would you agree with that assessment, or?
Yeah, that seems relatively accurate. Yeah.
Cool. Before going on demonstrating stuff, does anyone have any other comments or any other observations about this?
Another good observation is that when they go to block or to parry, there's usually always footwork involved. If you parry to the outside, you're stepping with the left leg, then the right leg. If you parry to the inside, you're stepping with the right leg, then the left leg. So there's always that kind of stepping void motion to enhance your parry.
Yeah, and sort of using kind of, and also like you've then got the aid of sort of body weight and also angle for you know, to help. So you're like, you know, does that then suggest that all the defenses, the parries, are meant to be a bit percussive as well, because you're like specifically bringing your body weight behind them to try and make them a bit more percussive than they would be just moving the hand?
I'm not sure. Because you're stepping with the foot in the direction that you want to go, you're not generating a whole lot of power with your body. So that doesn't necessarily represent that you're doing a percussive parry.
Mm.
Could it be a bind rather than a percussive strike or a percussive beat? Could it be a bind? Would he use the term then?
I think mostly he just wants to put a sword in the way.
Yeah.
But possibly.
Yeah, sort of. Well, then also, like, a lot of that would probably be about, it seems to be about capturing a position with your sword, capturing, you know, like, you know, especially if you're going to defend, he seems to think that you want to have the sword relatively in front, and then for attacking, that's like, it's fine to have it outside the line of your body if you're going to attack, but if you're going to defend, you want to sort of have it within the line of the body. Which is also why he's moving. So you know, there is the sword, or there is the line between you and your opponent. Your sword is somewhere along it to cover you. That's the impression I get from how he's describing the defenses.
If I could just, unrelated to that, make some comments. Which is just that I've realized that because this section is very dense with the information and terminology, it might be useful for people who are here who don't have the experience with the Italian terminology to just go through some of the words of the cuts and stuff so that people know what is being referred to. There's one in there that I do not understand exactly what he means, so it's some elucidation on that, which would be good, which is where it talks about a coltellare to his enemy. But in general, yeah, just so people know, so when it refers to a dritto squalembrato, that's a cut from the top right to the bottom left. You know, assuming that you're like right-handed and whatnot. And a reverso is the opposite, from the top left to the bottom right.
The coltellare is a cut. The generic term he uses for a cut, essentially, and it could mean either a dritto or a reverso.
Okay, cool. Makes sense.
Cool. And, you know, yeah. So dritto being a cut from sword side to offside, reverso being the reverse of that, being from offside to sword side, I assume.
So squalembrato means down on the diagonal, montante means upwards, and fendente is directly down.
Okay, cool.
And tondi is directly sideways.
Cool. May or may not be worth just specifying what those terms mean as we're going through in future, just because I know I will forget. I don't know about anyone else, but I definitely won't remember. Cool. So one of the comment I have that Chris kind of reminded me of, where the defender is making a lot of a lot of attacks to the leg, which the attacker is then defending by slipping, by just moving out of the way. And I don't know how specifically relevant this is to the series of plays, like the series of movements described, but one of the things that I do, or one of the things I do to control distance when I'm fencing saber, particularly against Chris, is if I want my opponent to back off, I'll throw specifically a riposte to their legs. You never want to do this dangerous, like it's too much danger of being countercut, but as a riposte, your opponent's best option to defend or riposte the legs is to jump backwards and to give you space. So if you're trying to stop something, you know, if you're trying to, particularly if you're trying to play defensively and you want to keep your opponent from basically just barreling in on you, that can be quite a useful tactic. I kind of get the sense that that's a bit of the motivation here with the defender riposting to legs as a way of kind of keeping the opponent or keeping the attacker from closing in on them too much. All right. So are there any other comments before we move on?
This is just a question which we might want to perhaps leave till later because it's a more general question, I guess, about the interpretation of the reasoning, I guess, or that we might surmise. Is just that the more that I think about it, it seems an interesting decision, I suppose, to make as you're saying, to have at the shoulder height both the outside and the inside guard. And I don't know, I suppose, does that imply that that the system is more centered on thrust, or I don't know, why might that have been Lovino's, or does he at some point perhaps try to justify or explain why he calls for what is a reasonably high guard, I guess, in terms of, means that you're carrying have the weight of the sword is quite a lot. So you would think there would be a good reason for that. But that might be something we can talk about at the end, I guess, if once we've gone through more of the stuff that might perhaps be more self-explanatory.
Yeah. I'm not sure the way the sword is the way the guard helps the way the sword is necessarily a huge consideration, because the way he describes everything seems to be quite active. I don't know, my solution if a particular guard tires me out is just to do things so I don't have to hold it for very long. But yeah, I think that's probably something that's going to become more apparent going through. Unless anyone else has any kind of thoughts on that. We'll probably seek to answer that question as we go. So I might just pause recording.